Hello, welcome to our next module on complex conditionals. So, what is a complex conditional? Well, here's an example. If I eat well, then I will feel good if I also sleep well. There are two conditionals in this sentence, as we can see by the fact that the word if occurs twice. There's the if at the beginning of I eat well, and then there's the if in between will feel good and I also sleep well. So this sentence has one conditional inside of another. There's that the antecedent is I eat well, and then the consequent actually contains I will feel good if I also sleep well. So it's a complex conditional because the sentence is one conditional, but it's got another conditional inside of it. So that's going to be our sort of topic for this module, but along with that we're going to learn a bunch of related stuff. So we're going to learn about how to symbolize complex conditionals, and we're going to need to add parentheses to our logical language to do so. And in fact, what we're going to do is lay out grammatical rules for our logical language, how to build sentences in it. And we're going to learn about something called official informal notation in the course of doing that. We're going to learn about parsing trees. These show how a sentence is built up by following the grammatical rules. We're going to learn about something called the main operator. We're going to learn about something in Logic 2010 called the parsing module, and then we're going to learn how to use all of this grammatical material to help us symbolize complex conditionals, and we'll also be doing derivations with complex conditionals. No new rules, but just doing derivations with them. So this material is pretty straightforward. In fact, it's not necessarily the most exciting material we're going to be learning, but it is important both particularly for helping us to symbolize and for something we're going to be doing a little bit later on called truth trees. So this is pretty important material, so let's get going with it. You'll see that it's pretty straightforward, but we do need to cover it. In this video, we're going to look at complex conditionals in a little bit more depth, and we're going to learn about parentheses, how they work in symbolizing. So, complex conditionals. So we're going to look at a couple of sentences that are complex conditionals, and in thinking about those sentences, it's going to be helpful to think of the person who's talking, me, as a regular fan of a sports team. So what does that mean? It means I want my team to win. I want the team that plays the best to win. And I think my team will play best, and so I think my team's going to win. Or at least those are the things that I think. So, suppose that the following is true. My team loses only if they play poorly. Is it true? We don't know, right? But let's suppose that it is true. How would I feel then? Well, I would be pretty happy, right? Why? Well, because I think my team is going to play well, and that means they're not going to lose, they're going to win, and so I'm going to be really happy because my team played well and won. So if in those situations where my team loses if they play poorly, those are situations where I'm happy. Do we know whether or not my team is going to lose only if they play poorly? We're not going to, maybe that conditional is true, maybe it's not. But here's something we can say. We can say, if my team loses if they play poorly, then I will be happy. That sentence is true, right? I'll be happy in those situations. Which ones? The ones where it turns out that my team loses only if they play poorly. That is a true sentence. And it's a complex conditional. Okay, good. So that's our first complex conditional, and we're going to get around to symbolizing that in a little bit, but it's going to be helpful first to see why we symbolize it in the way that we do to compare it with a different complex conditional sentence. So let's suppose, before we get to that sentence, the world's a little bit different, that my team plays poorly and lost. How am I going to feel? Unhappy. I am not pleased with this situation because my team didn't play well. I don't like that. And they lost. I don't like that. So in those situations where my team plays poorly and loses, what are those situations like in more detail? Well, another thing about them is that I am unhappy in those situations. Okay, now, does my team play poorly and lose? We don't know. But here's something we can say. If my team plays poorly and loses, then I will be happy. That sentence is false, right? That is not true, because if my team plays poorly and loses, I will be unhappy. Now, this conditional contains the word and we're going to learn how to symbolize the word and in several modules. We're not there yet, but we can say something using just if that says something basically the same as this, although in a slightly different way. We could say, if my team plays poorly, then if they lose, I will be happy. So if my team plays poorly, then if they also lose, I will be happy. And that sentence is also false. These are both things we could say, things we could think, and if we did say, sincerely say those things or think those things, we would be thinking false thoughts or saying false things. Okay, so we've now got two complex conditionals. We've got if my team loses only if they play poorly, then I will be happy. That one's true. We've got, if my team plays poorly, then if they lose, I will be happy. And that one's false. So we've got two sentences that are complex conditionals, and we're going to get to symbolizing them in just a second. Let's think about them slightly, just a little bit more. So they have different truth values because one is true and one is false, and they have different meanings. They say different things, and that's why, in this case, they have different truth values. They're talking about this, in describing the same world, one can be true and one can be false. And how is it, though, that they have those different meanings? They're built up out of the same atomic English sentences. We have, my team loses, they play poorly, and I will be happy. And these two sentences are both built up out of those same constituents, but they're combined in different ways. So the reason that these sentences have different truth values is because they have different meanings, and they have different meanings. Why? Because they have different logical structure. They're built up differently. Now, what is that difference in logical structure, just in the English? Well, if we look at the first sentence, it's a conditional, an if-then. And the then part is simple. It's just, I will be happy. But the if part, the antecedent, is itself a complex conditional. So what we've put there in the parentheses is, my team loses only if they play poorly. That is the antecedent of the main conditional. So we have a conditional, the whole main conditional is simple consequent, but complex antecedent, which is it, right? The antecedent is itself a conditional. If we look at the bottom sentence, we can do the same sort of analysis, but in this case, it's the second half that's the complex part. So the antecedent of the whole red sentence is just, my team plays poorly, right? There's that if hooked on to my team plays poorly, that's the antecedent. And then the consequent is what comes after the then, and that's, if they lose, I will be happy. So in one case, we have a conditional whose antecedent is itself a conditional. In the other case, we have a conditional whose consequent is itself a conditional. And they're built out of the same sentences, but because they're constructed in these different ways, they have different meanings and say different things. How are we going to symbolize these sentences? Well, they should get different symbolizations because they have different logical structure. So bearing that in mind, let's try to symbolize them. So we need a symbolization scheme. So we can say P will be, my team plays poorly, S will be, my team loses, and Y will symbolize, I will be happy. Good. So let's look at the first sentence. How might we symbolize the top one? You might think this is a good approach. We know my team loses only if they play poorly. That's part of it. And then look, that's the antecedent, right? So let's just put an arrow and then a Y on the end, right? And where the Y symbolizes, I will be happy. And you might think we could do something similar. And is that right? Well, we'll hold on for a second. What about the second sentence? You might think, well, look, we have, if they lose, I will be happy. And we know how to symbolize that. That's S, my team loses, arrow Y, I will be happy. And let's just put a P on the front of that for my team plays poorly with an arrow. So what do we think about these symbolizations? We do not like them. They are bad and wrong. Why? Well, the English, as we said, we need different symbolizations because we need to be able to look at the two sentences and say, okay, what's the antecedent? What's the consequent? But when we look at these two sentences, the orange sentences, who knows? What's the antecedent? What's the consequent? Is the antecedent P or is it P arrow S? What's the consequent? Is it just Y or is it S arrow Y? Who knows? There's nothing about the orange that tells us. If we look at the orange next to the green, we might say, oh, the antecedent is the P arrow S. But that's just because it's next to the green sentence. If we looked at P arrow S arrow Y by itself, we wouldn't know. Nothing would tell us. In fact, P arrow S arrow Y isn't grammatical, it's going to turn out. It doesn't have an antecedent or a consequent. So what we need are symbolizations that are going to be different of these two sentences. How are we going to get that? Well, let's just use parentheses, right? We use the parentheses in the English to sort of, or to clarify the English when we're thinking about the logical structure. We wouldn't do that in actual English, but we could certainly use parentheses in our logical language. We're just making it up. So maybe we could do this. We could put P arrow S in parentheses and say, okay, because they're going inside, they're grouped together, the P and the arrow and S make up a conditional, and then you hook the Y on with another arrow. And so we've grouped the P arrow S together, making it a unit that is then the antecedent of the main conditional. And we can do the same thing with the other sentence. We say, okay, S arrow Y, let's put parentheses around them. That makes them a unit, and then they have to be the consequent of the main conditional. And so then we have these two different symbolizations. We have on the top, parenthesis, P arrow S parenthesis, a unit, and then we put an arrow after that, which means that that unit that came before is going to be the antecedent of a conditional, and the Y is the consequent of the conditional, and the unit is P arrow S. So in the logical language, we have a conditional whose antecedent is itself complex, is itself a conditional, which is what we wanted, because in the English we have a conditional whose consequent is simple, I will be happy, but whose antecedent is complex, is a conditional. So good, we put the parentheses around the P arrow S, that makes them a unit. We put them on the before the conditional, before that other arrow, and that makes them the antecedent of the bigger sentence. And the same thing with the bottom. We put parentheses around the S arrow Y, that makes them a unit. They come after the arrow, the other arrow, and that makes them the consequent of that other arrow. And then we have the simple P antecedent. Okay. So we use parentheses to surround units that are pieces of a bigger sentence. And then we get our different symbolizations, which is what we wanted. The parentheses are there, they rule out the ambiguities, right? If we just have P arrow S arrow Y, that sentence is ambiguous. We don't know what's the antecedent, what's the consequent. In fact, the sentence doesn't have an antecedent or a consequent. There's nothing about it that makes it go one way or the other. And so that's why actually we're not going to allow that in our logical language. So the basic idea with parentheses is we have complex conditionals in English. We want to have symbolizations of complex conditionals in our logical language. How are we going to do that? We're going to use parentheses. We're going to use them to surround units that are pieces of the larger sentence. So that's the basic idea of parentheses, but we're actually going to lay out the grammatical rules of our logical language really explicitly, because that's going to help us do symbolization and something later called truth tables. So we're going to get into that in our next videos, having now seen how, okay, we need a richer language than the one we had. We need to add parentheses. How are we going to do that? In terms of actually being really precise about the rules, that's going to happen in our next video.